Hello, everyone. Sorry for the change in angle, but we're going to move right on in and we're going to start looking at the end of the war
In the Pacific.
in the Pacific. The fact of, well,
We've conquered Okinawa. We've actually taken Japanese
that
soil,
is correct.
and it was not pretty.
It was a bloodbath.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And the fact that, well, we had that plan at the end of Okinawa of what to do to go into Japan.
Well, right. It doesn't seem like there's. I mean, we've blockaded them pretty
We
successfully
have.
even before now.
Correct.
And so in late 44, early 45, the Army slash Navy together, because we do everything together in the
Oh,
Pacific.
yes, we
You know,
do.
you got MacArthur and Nimitz,
Going hand in
making
hand.
nice.
Hmm That's about the easiest way you can put it, too.
But Operation Downfall becomes a thing.
Yes.
I mean, whoever came up with that code word wasn't thinking very codey.
No.
Something like,
I don't know.
monkey wrench or
Yeah,
something would have made more sense.
something completely off the wall would have been perfect. But
Right.
the planned operation, planned invasion of Japan, of taking the main islands
Right.
and
Especially
trying to
Kyushu and Honshu.
yes.
Shikoku and Hokkaido up top aren't really very necessary to the war effort.
Now, those are mostly mountainous anyway.
Yeah.
You're seeing most of your cities, especially the capital, Tokyo, on what was that, Honshu,
Honshu.
and then of
That's
course,
the big island.
yes, and then you have Kyushu, which is where,
Southern island.
yes, the southern island where you will find one of two major cities, Nagasaki, which is actually on Kyushu. But again, getting ahead of ourselves. The idea is, of course, we are going to try and attack the main island. The first, of course, being uh, Kyushu. So you want me to?
Yeah, let's go there first.
All right.
So, downfall is the idea. And when they originally make it, it's broken into two parts. Olympic, which is the landing on Kyushu. The idea is to take the southern third of the island and use that as an air base because Okinawa is not big enough for the amount of air forces that we bring.
Correct.
So the Navy's idea is that we're going to have to take some bases in Korea, Manchuria, and Formosa,
Right.
and then so we can support that way, which still limits the amount of land-based fighter aircraft we can have. The bombers are fine; they can fly from Saipan. It's
Sure.
got a lot of wear and tear on the crews because it's a long flight. But
Yes. But that short range land aircraft is the problem.
when you can have P-51s and Corsairs can get anywhere because the carrier can just sail by. But when you have P-51s and P-47s flying over Tokyo, the enemy has got to know in their heart things are bad. I don't know how well they take it because we'll talk about the Japanese perspective here in a minute.
But the thing is, I don't understand is, thinking about this. Okay, we've got this planned invasion, and we see some of the things that are going to happen as this plan unfolds. They're thinking, okay, the Japanese are going to surrender as soon as possible. Unfortunately,
We have
that's
no
not the
indicators
case.
of that.
We don't know. I mean, think about it. We've been fighting in all throughout the Southern Pacific where the Japanese have taken over, and it doesn't go well in terms of
Well,
surrender.
We don't get surrenders.
No,
I mean, we get people who have been wounded 2 and 3 times.
correct.
People are dying of dehydration.
Yes.
You can't say no.
Well, and again, even what the last battle we see, before Okinawa, Iwo Jima, we only had 1,000, not even 1,000 surrender.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're down below 10% of soldiers are surrendering.
And again, that just there's no real indicator of the American forces that, hey, we're gonna get these people to surrender as soon as possible. In the casualty rates, we were thinking what was our projected casualty rate? We were thinking about,
Okinawa was 35% of the people engaged.
okay,
So of the combat forces engaged, which even in a combat division, not everybody's a combat guy.
correct,
But it's still 35% were casualties. So
Right.
typically in the Pacific theater, it seemed like 1 to 3. So that means 9 to 10,000 dead. I think Okinawa was actually 12.
Yeah, it was around 12 on Okinawa, but the
Um,
idea of, again, having those
So
high.
it's more the 1 to 2 like we see in European theater.
True. And
Um,
and that's the thing I don't understand. Why we would even think of saying, okay, hey, we're gonna try and take on an island that is 3, 4, 5 times the size of Okinawa.
with well, it's yeah, it's even bigger than that.
It's
More
hundreds
than
of times bigger.
True. But the idea
Yeah.
is, of course, you're having also a large civilian population.
Right, which on Okinawa suffered greatly
Correct.
from the fighting, but also from suicide and murder-suicide
Right.
all across the island, which was disturbing to the Americans present because even if I can't even imagine most of the guys there thinking that if the Germans were winning and invading Missouri, we would be killing our women and children and killing ourselves. So that
Yeah.
I just wouldn't be.
It would not. No, it wouldn't even be in our mindset. But again, that's the Japanese understanding.
So we have to find a way to finish this war.
Yes.
We've got two big considerations. One, we need to do it as quick as we can.
Right.
Despite the incredible
Industrial might of the United States, financially things are getting a little shaky. We're not raising as much with war bonds. Who's got money?
Right.
I mean, the guys working at the factories, but at a certain point, they realize that they're going to need that money when this war is over. My grandfather being one of them, who early 1945, quit his job at the bomber factory in Wichita, went and got another job. And everybody's like, "You're stupid," because they're getting 6 shifts a week instead of 5. All this overtime, they're making money hand over fist. 2 months later, it goes away. But not yet. I mean, right now, the military's planning. They're already increasing the draft classes.
True.
They're redirecting a whole lot more of the draft classes into the infantry and the Marines because that's what we're going to need. We don't need a bunch of bomber pilots. They last a long time now.
That's a good point.
They didn't last at the beginning of the war, but now 50 missions is not even that hard anymore.
Right.
And the second, of course, is casualties.
Right.
we have to limit our casualties as much as possible.
While still succeeding in our constraints.
Correct.
So the Navy, of course,
They're really good on the let's don't have casualties.
Yeah.
because I mean, honestly, when the Navy
Navy gets casualties on board ship, it's usually a lot.
Correct.
a
It's
whole
either
ship goes down,
right, or there may have been a kamikaze that ran into their ship and caused a massive explosion. Whatever the case is, the alternatives, however, when it comes to the alternatives, we were going to, and of course this was a part of it. We had to blockade the continent or the country.
That was already really almost in effect anyway.
Yes.
but the plan was to just lift.
The blocking and bombing.
Correct.
I mean, the Navy wasn't talking about
Just sitting off the coast and waiting for them
No.
to fire.
They were talking about
Still actively bombing targets, especially railroads, distribution centers, ports,
manufacturing centers,
anything that
things along those lines.
floated more than half a second. So
He's gone.
don't go in your backyard in a little pool and
Yeah.
act like a raft.
You're
They'll
done.
Shoot you.
You're done. But again, by taking that control over the Japanese mainland, we now would then take over Korea, Manchuria, Formosa, again, like we mentioned earlier.
Right. So we're getting involved in a land war in Asia,
Yes.
which we know if you watch The Princess Bride, you never do.
Never a good idea. Forgot about that. But again, we would see this taking over a long period of time.
Yeah, most projections put it well into 1947, maybe 48 before. Now, part of it is they didn't realize at the time that Japan was already on really short rations, less than 1,400 calories a day for people. That is
very
low,
low, especially for men.
Recommended daily, even at that time, would be what, maybe about 1,800, possibly
And that's
2,000.
if you're sedentary.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you're just trying to maintain a weight and not doing a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And 1,400 calories and working in a factory 70 hours
You're
a week.
done.
You're going to start seeing those extra effects of starvation.
Correct.
You're going to start seeing other diseases show up, and we'll talk more about that starvation situation later. But I don't think most people thought that we could sustain the war effort for another 3 years.
Not the monetary situation.
No, I mean obviously you could scale back stuff, but eventually you're still going to need an occupation army.
Correct.
You can't just get rid of the army because you've occupied Korea, or you're trying to occupy
Right.
Manchuria and Formosa. That's going to take hundreds of thousands of men. So you're not really trimming the army down,
No.
which they were between June and August. They're letting people go home.
That's a good point.
You see that in Band of Brothers where
That's true.
they're worried about
Right.
the point system.
Right.
You know, if you've got so many combat days and so many medals, you get points. You get to go home. The problem is when you started instituting that system, it sounded really great. Of course, it was really popular among the troops who had points.
Sure.
Which, of course, the
They wanted
airborne
to go
was full of.
Right. They had a
'Cause
lot of combat.
If you'd been there the whole time, you've got possibly up to 4 parachute drops and,
Yes.
and a whole lot of combat time.
And at least almost a year and a half of combat.
Yeah, obviously with breaks, I don't know how they counted off the line and stuff like that. But either way, you're taking away the guys who run the battle.
Correct.
Your captains and your majors who are going to run your companies and your battalions, your sergeants that are going to run your squads and platoons.
Right.
They're all got the points. They're going home.
Yeah. You're left with a bunch of.
They're not coming back.
No, heck no. And you're left within a bunch of privates, corporals who are, the grunts, the people who are running the operations in terms of men, but they don't have the expertise like your captains, your majors, your sergeants, your first sergeants. But the next major alternative would be chemical weapons, which
scares me. I learned something new.
Okay.
During the research for this, something new and good about the United States of America.
Oh, really?
This was proposed. Why?
Mhm.
We had chemical weapons. Almost everybody had chemical weapons in World
Right.
War II, but they never used them because of fear the other people would.
Yes, of course.
The only people who used chemical weapons that I know of in World War II are the Italians against the Ethiopians, so technically not in the war, but
No.
and the other was Japanese used it against the Chinese, which would have been our excuse for using them.
Sure.
But it was discussed, but it was never researched, never planned. It was
Goodness,
actually
too.
vetoed so early, which is, I think, impressive. The only thing that was actually planned with any sort of real vigor was the idea of using chemical weapons against holdouts.
Okay.
These cave complex kind of people where you're just losing too many men trying to clear them out of these bunkers.
That makes
Throwing
sense.
some nerve gas down there would be a much better alternative than sending in guys. And that's where most of the casualties in Okinawa were coming.
That does make sense to try and just reduce your number of casualties. But again, oh my goodness, then
But the problem is logistically it wasn't possible. Our troops weren't equipped to fight in a chemical environment.
No, they were not.
I mean, the Japanese weren't either.
No, but
First and foremost, you have to protect your own guys.
exactly.
So chemical weapons just wasn't really a viable alternative, but it was an interesting discussion in the documents I read. And then, of course, the difficulty is Japan is a mountain
Right.
with cities on it. And you only have 2 major areas that you can land.
And again, that would be southern Kyushu, where again we had the operation put into play, and that's where we would be having
That's
our
Olympic,
And then of course the Kanto Plain on Honshu, which
which
that's
is north of Tokyo.
yes, where again it's difficult. It's trying to come across an area that is unfamiliar to many of these individuals, which of course any territory outside of the United States is unfamiliar to most of our people.
Yes, but I mean, even with good aerial photography, it has a hard time seeing the vertical.
Correct.
And when you're talking about Japan, seeing the vertical is vital.
Yes.
But obviously, when you're planning for the defense, so we'll go talk about Ketsugo.
So
Thank you. I've lost.
you're fine. You're fine. So we're going to go up here to Ketsugo, and we are going to be looking here again at the idea of how the Japanese will try to defend against our planned invasion.
Right. It literally is calling for decisive battle. That's really the name of it implies. And again, on the home islands, they have 2 beaches to defend. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, it's a lot more beaches. On
Yeah,
Kyushu
but-
alone, it's 35.
Wow.
But they're
geez.
small.
Right. You're not going to
Kanto
see.
Plain Beach is much bigger,
Mhm.
but still, you only have 2 spots in all the border that they have with the ocean.
You would expect to
They got
see.
2 places.
Yeah, and it's not well. Again, you're not seeing it like maybe mainland China, where they have a large amount of area that way.
Oh yeah, you
or-
could pick your landing spot, like the Japanese did in 1937.
Exactly.
So with Ketsugo, again, the idea is to
Prevent a massive amphibious assault. But
Oh no, they wanted the amphibious assault.
okay.
They wanted to decisively drench the Americans in their own blood.
Ooh,
That's a quote, by the way. That's an awesome quote.
wow.
But I mean, that was their goal. That was what they were telling their people. That's what they were telling anybody who'd listen. That was their goal. They didn't see surrender. They wanted to let the Americans land because they couldn't get us at us any other way.
True.
They wanted us to land so we could defeat them decisively, or they could defeat us decisively on the beaches, and therefore cause the Americans to sue for peace.
You think we would have really done something like that? I could see it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the top end casualties, if you start looking at 250,000 dead, 400,000 dead, 500,000 dead,
That's a lot of people to.
I think you'd see the American people going, it's time to just let them have their emperor and
Yep.
go about their ways. But of course, their plan wasn't just to keep the emperor. They wanted to keep Korea, they wanted to
Yes.
keep Formosa and China as well.
Well, and we
There's no way that would have been acceptable.
No, we weren't going to give up that much territory.
At the bare minimum, they were going to give up all of China, everything in China, including Manchuria. Just that would have been a minimum of our requirements, I think.
Yes.
Because Formosa was conquered in 1895,
Right.
and Korea was like 1910 or something
Yeah,
like that. So I mean,
yes.
those were older.
Right. We were okay of letting them go, but unfortunately, we would not allow anything on mainland China.
Because China was one of our allies,
Correct.
and they claimed Manchuria.
Right.
But the plan was to use all the troops, which they had over 5 million, 3 million Army and 2 million Navy personnel. And most of these Navy personnel aren't doing anything.
No.
Their Navy's a wreck.
Yeah.
They have four battleships, all of which are damaged. 5 carriers, all of which are damaged.
Yep.
2 cruisers, 23 destroyers. We have more than 23 destroyers in a task group, let alone a fleet.
Right. I mean,
We do have a lot more submarines than I expected, 46.
Okay,
but again, do they have trained crews? Do
Probably
they have,
not.
And here's the most important. They don't have the gas.
No, of course not. And again, this is prior to the nuclear age, so
Right.
Okay.
You've got to have oil.
Yeah, you got to have oil. You got to have your gasoline. You got to make sure that you're able to run your ships. We have that because again, we have such a massive amount of resources. We were then, of course, providing a lot of those resources to the Japanese prior to the war. So once we cut them off, boom, they're in some dire straits. And well, it's what we just mentioned. They have 2 of their major classes of battleships, the battle cruisers, the battleship, and then of course the carriers that are damaged, and they don't have very many of them in the first place. So
they're waiting. Japan is surprisingly, for all the mountains, really doesn't have much in the way of coal or iron. It's very surprising.
But it's
then you
mostly
look at their housing.
right,
It's all wood and paper
right.
instead of steel and things like
Yeah,
that.
well, and again, these are volcanic islands. The mountains are more dormant volcanoes.
Right. They're not just pushed up
Right.
plates, which
Yeah.
would have coal and iron.
Right.
They're
These are
volcanoes which don't have iron. It's very few. They melt it. So
they've got obsidian, which
Yeah.
that doesn't really help you much unless you're doing something with spas.
it
But
lets you fall in it, and then it just cuts you to pieces.
Yeah.
Gosh.
yeah, right.
It's like coral.
Ugh,
Ah,
worst.
cut you up.
So the plan was to just take all these kamikazes.
Ugh,
They had almost 12,000 planes still left.
true.
Now, I don't know if they had enough gas to
Right.
Fill
Fuel.
them up.
Would, yep. Mhm.
But they only had 8,000 pilots, which is going to be a problem because kamikazes tend to use up their pilots.
Yeah,
That's kind of the whole purpose of a kamikaze.
you fly yourself with the plane into the
Yeah.
ship,
I
right?
mean, if you ever
So-
become an ace as a kamikaze, they shoot you for cowardice.
I think that's kind of an oxymoron, right?
I've flown 5 missions.
What?
Yeah.
You're not a kamikaze. You're sorry, buddy.
Cigarette.
Yeah. But
And then the idea, of course, is once the landings start happening, once they know exactly where they are,
correct.
go after those ships madly with these kamikazes.
Right.
Waves. The plan was for waves of 400 to 500 at a time,
Holy
just
mackerel.
coming almost every hour.
That's a lot of
I mean,
planes, just massive
And,
amounts.
You're doing this one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't do the
You're
right
good.
one.
You're
Okay.
good. I'm gonna
So-
move down to this one though.
And of course, Ketsu Go. The Japanese aren't stupid.
Right.
They have like 7 different plans of Ketsu Go, but they really focused on the 2 that they could do the most about. They didn't really care about the invasion of Formosa or Manchuria. They couldn't do anything about them from the
Right.
whole islands.
Yeah.
And so the goal is get these Americans on the land and then crush them by close combat. Well, the problem is you're also talking about they're arming civilians. Now,
Oh,
what are they
yes.
arming them with?
Broomsticks.
Sometimes literally broomsticks that are sharpened.
Yep.
But
They used it to a small degree on Okinawa, where they drafted mostly men,
Uh huh.
but also women to a certain extent. to fight. Well, what they would do is they'd use these people basically as bullet magnets.
Correct.
That allowed the combat troops to get in close because they knew when they could get in close, they're a match for the Marines with
They
the
are.
bayonets. If you're
Mhm.
fighting with bayonets
It's
and the Americans can't bring in their artillery and their air power, you can fight on equal terms.
correct.
But you, of course, when you don't care about this massive bloodletting that your population is going to take, it becomes a tactic that makes sense.
And here's again the issue what we find again the Japanese society, and again we mentioned it with Okinawa, we mentioned it with many other battles of previous the peoples of Okinawa and of course what would become Ketsugo would literally fight to the last person. And no matter if you were a civilian or a military personnel, you are fighting. And it's to the last person, which is really surprising for Americans.
We don't think, well, Europeans even
Yes.
don't really, even the Russians didn't think that
No,
far. They
they
had
had
the machine gun people who wouldn't charge.
Yes.
I don't know that you would have needed to do that here.
Right.
I mean, maybe later in the invasion. Maybe.
Sure,
But
sure.
The initial stages, and well, I got some great stats. Okinawa, kamikazes hit 1 out of every 9.
Wow.
When you start talking 450 planes in a wave, that's 50 hits.
Yeah.
You go through ships really fast.
You
Now,
do.
granted, you can only do 20 waves.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're out of pilots.
Right.
So that's good.
But
But that means you have 100 and some hits or 1,000 hits.
yes.
Holy moly! We didn't have that many ships. That means most ships
No.
are taking 2 or 3 hits,
True.
which means your destroyers are just gone, and your troop ships are hosed.
And again, that is projected numbers, of course, that
And that was
I mean-
against a fleet that was purely designed to fight off kamikaze threat. Lots and lots of anti-aircraft guns. I mean, they had machine guns welded on places that weren't in the plans.
well,
And
you had
Okinawa.
to. You had to.
You had to. You just throw enough lead in the air and hope it hits somebody.
Well,
I don't even want to imagine the friendly fire on that. But,
I'm sure.
but when we look at that, so if we multiply that by just 4, which is low actually,
Yes.
144 sunken ships, 1,500 damaged. We don't even have that many ships,
No.
which means the damage. Some of them are going to hit again and again.
And possibly sinking on their way back to getting into dry dock.
Assuming they even get out of
Right.
the area.
Right.
'Cause, I mean, these kamikazes, they see a damaged ship,
Yep.
they're going
They're go straight for it.
So, yeah, it's kind of one of those, if you get damaged, you're probably dead.
Yes.
So, and, we don't want to get too bogged down in numbers, but that's a lot.
That is a lot.
I mean, and that's what Nimitz and King, which is
Mhm.
the chief of naval operations for the whole Navy, are looking at. That's why they're thinking blockade
Right.
and bombardment, because if we get close enough to land people, we're exposed to all these kamikazes.
Correct.
And we just don't have the firepower to keep them out.
Right.
We tried. It didn't work. So Olympic, which became Majestic because some idiot put Olympic as a code name out over the air
Right.
without being encoded. So they changed it to Majestic. It means nothing.
No, it's just a different
But
idea, but or a
the
different name.
Japanese have 15 divisions
Uh-huh.
on Kyushu.
Mhm.
900,000 men.
That's a lot of men.
Basically at the end of October. The planned invasion is November 1st.
Okay.
Our estimates say 450,000 Japanese
Wow.
on Kyushu. We are off.
We're off by
At least
And
what?
part of it, I think, is hubris in a huge way. We've been winning this war. We're getting stronger and stronger. And I think they're looking at this and they're saying there's no way the Japanese can have anything left in the tank, which, by the way, is the exact same thing that happened to the Germans in 41 and 42.
Yep.
Well, they just can't be. They don't have any more men. Well, yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do. They
It's just who are you willing to stick out there?
Correct.
But eventually, the idea that 45 divisions, which, of course, against the 8 that we thought were there, would be an overwhelming force, 5-1 plus all the air power. Oh, yeah, we had a big time. But when you're talking at 3-1 odds, you're at the bare edge of victory conditions.
Correct. Now, as you'll see, what we will see is that again we over project our positive numbers, so that again I think it's also so that the men can feel more confident.
Yeah, I think this was kind of one of those kind of a trickle up or trickle down. Probably trickle down because the guys who fought on the front line were well aware of how fierce the Japanese were.
Yeah,
And they
there's no
weren't
doubt.
willing to count them out. Every operation in the Pacific took 2 to 3 times longer than planned, and the casualty rates were 4 to 5 times higher. So when these planners talk about the need for 100,000 replacements every month, that's probably low.
Yeah, you're probably looking at least 250 to maybe even 300,000 every month to replace those that have been either wounded or killed.
Right.
And so it becomes more of an issue. Again, what we find, of course, when it initially was planned was to, again, have these landings all throughout Kyushu. But the problem, of course, is the troop strength.
Right.
How are we going to get that many people that close to Japanese islands?
And assuming that everything goes well in the air, which I think is a guess,
Yes.
but I mean, it's going to help that we have Okinawa. So we have a lot of Army Air Force coming in
Sure.
to help out. Those P-51s and P-47s that can reach Kyushu without a problem.
Sure.
That's going to help a lot. Probably strengthen the air defenses to a deal. So maybe the casualties aren't going to be as drastic as we would by simple multiplication.
Right.
But still, the fact that it was now only 3 to 1, which means the Japanese will have opportunities to win local victories
Yes.
because they'll swamp the American machine guns with civilians
And then just
and
come
then
in
get
and
in-
take
then
over.
get into bayonet and hand grenade
Yes.
range. The Americans can't call in artillery because the
You
Japanese
don't
are like right across the room.
Right.
And I think they might have had a chance. I don't think they would have won.
No, but
I don't believe that in a minute. We'll get that in a second.
but taking those battles, the small battles,
Right.
can wear down a military.
Well, it can cause panic.
Yes.
If all of a sudden the battalion next to you gets overrun,
You're like, holy
yeah,
crap,
that's never happened.
ours is next.
Yeah, well, they're turning our flank. Now we got to guard not just our front, but our side.
Yes.
And it's hard. But in May and June, they revised all the plans because now Okinawa's pretty much done.
Yes.
And we have a better idea.
Mhm.
They reevaluate, and they still don't get up to the numbers that they have. In fact, that's when they got to that 450,000.
That's
They're a little
unreal.
bit more accurate with aircraft, estimating around 9,000,
That's true.
which they have more than that, but they don't have more pilots. So it
No,
doesn't
so
really matter.
it does. Yeah. So, but the idea is, again, these planners still don't know.
Well, in the casualty estimates, one of them was based on 5% of the losses of Okinawa. So somehow we're going to lose 1/20th of the guys we lost in Okinawa. Seems low.
Yeah, especially when you have a bigger military population, you have a bigger civilian population.
And access to supplies.
Yes.
Because they're not shipping.
Yes.
But even using that estimate, that's a really weenie low estimate.
Right.
They're looking at 300,000 dead.
That's a lot of dead.
I mean, 300,000 dead times 2 wounded, you're looking at 1 million guys that are damaged in some fashion.
And again, that's early projections.
And that's an early projection. Now, that was for the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle.
Ooh, no,
but,
thank you.
But I mean, realistically, you'd have to multiply that by 20. Why
Right.
would casualties be lighter on the home islands
Right.
than in Okinawa? That means we're looking at 6 million dead.
That's true.
That's not acceptable.
No.
So, but let's assume it happens. I mean, that's what we have to do because we don't know anything's going to change. So the plan is November 1st, we're going to invade. The problem is Ketsugo literally goes online. They've done their 3 phases of Ketsugo,
Right.
ending in about 25 October. So they're ready. They're as ready
Yeah.
as they're going to get.
Yeah.
Well, no,
Okay,
because
but-
October 9th, Typhoon Louise blows through, actually sinks 12 ships.
Wow.
And 222 grounded, 32 damaged beyond repair, which means effectively sunk.
Yes.
So 44 ships were sunk. Better than the Imperial Japanese Navy did in any battle.
Wow.
Go Louise!
Yeah. It's very similar to, again, like what we mentioned with the kamikaze.
Exactly. I mean, I can't imagine the morale on the
Oh my
Japanese
gosh,
home
they
islands
are
would have
just-
went soaring.
They are literally just like, oh my goodness, the gods are over us.
Oh, and I think casualties probably would have been worse
Yes.
than they were in here because in October in our world,
Right.
they were able to maneuver and do whatever they wanted because there weren't a bunch of troop ships.
True.
There's a bunch of troop ships out there. I think it would have been
would've
triple that
Yes.
number easy.
You would have seen a huge
Thousands
change.
of dead.
Yes.
Thousands of dead.
You would have seen a change in our planning that unfortunately would have made this war last longer would have taken, again, how many more troops of maneuvering and then trying to get them prepared and moving them onto the home island. It was just going to be disastrous.
Yeah, the estimates I saw were 45 days delay, which means now they're not invading until December 16th.
You're too late.
Well, you're okay because southern Japan is fairly semi-tropical.
True, but
It's like invading Florida.
again,
It's colder, but
But you're also allowing many of these troops to move in, prepare for those
they can dig
ultimately
deeper.
fortifications of when we did come onto the island, and they just come in and swamp us.
And of course, that was going to delay Coronet,
Yes.
which was in, I do believe, April
Right.
of 46. So we're pushing that to like June of 46.
Which,
Again,
depending on
more-
how easily
more
we
weapons.
can take
So instead of having a broomstick, now I have a basic rifle and 5 rounds of ammo.
that's true. I'm 10 times as deadly
Yes.
as I was last week.
Right.
And the interesting part is this all kind of runs into something that the planners didn't really see. They were trying to empathize when we talk about the chemical weapons. One of the
True.
chemical weapons they really talked about was something that would kill the rice.
Ooh, try to starve them out. That was part of the plan.
As far as I know, it never got used in any mass number. But so if the invasion goes ahead, probably in December now,
Right.
um, I think Olympic would have been successful just because of the sheer firepower.
Right.
I mean, every time that America, by the time this would have been over, say sometime in probably March.
Right.
Because remember, we're only taking the southern third. The northern half, northern 2/3 is mostly just mountains, so we
We
wouldn't
don't
want to
need to
go
go
there.
there.
We don't need that. We just need the airfields.
Right. So that we can go on into Honshu.
That's the goal.
Right.
We've got to take
Tokyo.
and the Emperor,
Right.
which is why Coronet, also not a sneaky code name. But when you look at first, of course, this kamikaze wind blowing
Yes.
through and damaging the
Correct.
fleet
Correct.
would have raised Japanese morale. But then because of the much closer to the equality of the combat forces, means that local victories, Japanese propaganda machine would have played those up.
Right.
Huge. They would have paraded captured Americans, through the streets of Nagasaki, showing people that, look, we can be victorious if we just have faith in the Emperor.
Correct. Correct.
And that then brings about the issue of the longevity of this invasion. You're going to continue on into even if Typhoon Luis did not come
Delay
in and
things.
delay things.
Oh, yeah.
You still would be seeing a massive amount of
Just time. You're adding another 6 to 12 months onto the war,
which
and that's again on the low end. You don't know how
Right.
these people would have actually fought had we invaded. It could have
Oh.
taken another a year and a half just to get done with Kyushu.
Well, yeah, we could have been looking at well into 47, 48 before we were effectively around Tokyo. Now, on the good side, assuming there could be a good side that involves millions of dead,
Right.
as we move into the fall,
in winter of 1945, early 1946,
Yeah.
Japan's ration situation would reach critical mass.
you would literally start looking at
At less than 1,000 calories a day for average people, maybe less, which means there are reports now already. So in the real world,
Uh-huh.
in June of 1945, so well before any of this happens,
true.
with children talking about the fact that they were sent out of the cities because the cities couldn't sustain them. They were sent to the countryside because logistics was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids were eating bugs.
Like
They were-
grub worms.
Yeah, they were.
Whatever they get their hands on, they
Wow.
were starving.
Wow.
I mean, children just need protein.
Yes,
bad.
of course they do.
They're
They're growing.
And they're growing. Well, they're not. Because they're starving.
You're right. You're right.
And the estimates of 1946, the deaths could have been anywhere from 1 million to 7 million. It's only through massive intervention in the United States after the war was over that prevented this giant famine from destroying Japan as we know it.
That's unreal.
And so it would have shortened the war,
It could have definitely shortened the war,
but it only,
but only for
unlike what
yes.
Nimitz would have thought,
Yes.
they wouldn't have surrendered because people were starving.
No.
But if we had troops on the ground, they might have, because their army would have started dwindling to nothing.
That's true.
And as we were fighting, we'd be destroying food supplies.
That's a good
We
point.
would have been bombing everything that moved, so they couldn't have moved like food to the troops.
That's yes.
But
in the counter argument to the strangulation plan of Nimitz, Chinese were dying at 10,000 a month.
Right.
So extending the war by 18 months is 180,000 dead.
And that's something we as cannot just continue with.
No, and it's huge. We fed what? Let's see. Here it is. The actual world. We fed 18 million city dwellers in July. That doesn't sound right.
20.
That
Yeah.
must have been at 40. That was 46.
Yeah, that was like 46. Yep.
Okay, I was looking at 45. Like,
No, no,
we
no.
weren't there at 45.
No. And-
20 million
yeah.
in August and 15
Yeah.
million in September,
Yeah.
which means most likely they saved 11 million lives in the famine of 1946,
Which is an
which
amazing.
would have come earlier
Yes, it
and
would have.
been more severe
It would have been.
and wouldn't have had that food. So 7 million might even have been low.
But again, we have to also think about this. Again, these are what ifs, but
Right.
we have to think about the fact that you're still fighting a war. People are going to find whatever they can to continue to fight for their emperor, for their God on earth.
I wonder at what point the army would have ceased to exist because of starvation.
It probably wouldn't have lasted much longer after our invasion, because again, even if you are
Invasion
doing
in Honshu.
Correct.
Kyushu would have been, the emperor's not, they're not going to surrender because Kyushu falls.
No.
Honshu is
No, it would
the
have to
center of
be-
Japan.
It would have to be the Operation Cornet
Yes.
when we invade the main
island where our ultimate decisive victory would have been. And again, we see this as a what if.
I think,
But-
I think Olympic, Majestic,
Yes.
I think it would have been successful. The casualty rates would have been insane for both sides. Again, just like Okinawa.
Right.
But then as we would have limped into 1946, and their supply situation would have gotten worse and worse and worse. Because you don't grow much rice in
No.
northern Kyushu.
No, you don't.
And our airplanes would have literally been strafing anything that looked like it might be moving.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's 4 people on a road. Strafe them.
Yeah.
Because they might be carrying rice in backpacks.
True.
I mean, that's what Germany looked like at the end of the war,
Correct.
with the 51s and the 47s flying over
And just
strafing cars, trucks,
Right.
whatever.
Whatever that moved that would be able to get troops or supplies moving into an area.
Yep.
boom, get it
Yeah.
out of here.
And so the same thing would have happened in Japan, but it would have been multiplied because the logistics network of Japan is a whole lot tighter
Mm-hmm.
because of the mountains.
Correct.
So what happens if you block 2 or 3 passes? Suddenly
You're
there's a
done.
whole bunch of the country doesn't eat.
Yeah.
And the deaths. So what we're looking at is up to 1 million Americans dead and wounded,
Right.
and Japanese dead numbering in the tens of millions possibly.
Right. From starvation, from wounded, from death of both invasions.
Right.
And it would just ultimately have led to a massive, a collapse
We're-
of their civilization.
Possibly, yeah, because we're looking at over 20% dead.
That's unreal.
20% dead. And that doesn't count the 2 million they'd already suffered before this point. I mean, it's just, it's unimaginable. It's literally the stuff of post-apocalyptic movies.
Correct.
I mean, really, you'd have people literally eating each other.
Yes.
And that's not saying anything bad about the Japanese. I'm just saying this is people pushed to the brink of
That's
starvation.
And that, again, is just the unfortunate reality of how American planners decided to try to end the war.
Right. But we had no choice.
Right.
You have to remember, Nimitz didn't know. MacArthur didn't know.
No.
Nobody knew about this cool little plan known as the Manhattan District. And we're going to talk about that next time.
Yes.
Oh, my bad.